All right, welcome back. Mr. Kabazo, you were making a point about the conversation we ought to be having now. Could you go ahead, please?
Conversation. So the point that the conversation we should be having is, if this country has the capacity to produce 2.5 million barrels of oil, including condensates, daily, why aren't we doing so? And we should be holding the feet of the people who have responsibility to the fire to deliver that, and not accept that, oh, because they haven't done so in the past, then we should lower the expectations. And that's basically what you've heard Mr. President allude to. The fact that he's basically told these guys, you must deliver on this, because it's not a technical impossibility. The two principal constraints that had been highlighted by the industry in the past. One was a funding constraint. The government has dealt with the funding constraint. That's why we changed the funding plan for the JVs, from the erstwhile cash call that was inhibiting. They now have the free and to be able to fund the operations. The security was a problem. Government has invested in the security. There's a provision, in the budget, and provision to ensure that the production fuels and pipelines are secured. And so, if you've dealt with this, then you need to get on with the job and deliver on the target. That's basically, I'm saying that's the discussion we should be having, not saying, because you haven't done so in the past. It's convenient to say you haven't done so in the recent past. But if you go back 6 years ago, we've delivered 2.4 million barrels a day. We've delivered 2.5 million barrels on occasions. So it's not, this is not rocket science. There's no technical, impossibility.
Let's have
thing. I hear everybody, people go on, the revenue projections are not realistic.
Okay, we'll come to that as well.
We have the lowest revenue.
Pardon me, we'll also come to that as well, but let's get Mr. Chris David to respond to this. Mr. David, did you actually factor in some of those considerations before you came to those conclusions of yours?
Well, what I was actually saying is that this budget lacks the vision and does not reflect the preferred future for Nigerians. This budget is still largely based on oil, it's driven by oil. At this point in time, we should be talking about how we should look at new revenue sources. And this budget that I've looked at does not provide, there is no anywhere that shows that this government wants to actually diversify this economy. And in a nation of over 190 million people, we are still budgeting 8 trillion. And I'm saying that, is this budget relevant? The state government budgets take the aspirations from the federal government budget. So even when you put all the state government budgets together, the budget we have in Nigeria cannot take people out of poverty. We will not be able to create enough jobs to lift the 20.9 million people out of unemployment. So what I expect the government to do is to look at new avenues to generate revenue. For instance, what is our policy on tourism? Dubai, for instance, is generating the whole amount of money that we've budgeted from tourism. What is the amount of revenue are we making from sports, for example? Other nations make so much money from sport. I have not seen that. And that's why I'm saying that this budget lacks the vision and is still the stereotype. And with this kind of budget, Nigeria will not grow. We need a budget that is ambitious. We need a budget that is based on foresight. We need a budget that we say in the next 5 years, this is where Nigeria will be. In the next 10 years, this is where Nigeria will be. That is what I'm talking about, budget relevance.
All right.
Yes, these other figures.
Okay, we'll come back to that again. Just hang on a minute, Dr. Guyemi. Looking at those key assumptions, which Mr. Kabuzi spoke about, he expatiated on some of those key assumptions, thinking, well, this is an ambitious one. It's continuity. And so for you, do you think these assumptions are realistic?
I feel that those assumptions are not realistic.
Why?
They're not realistic because they tend to be assumptions that are based without deference to the history, to the foundations, to what we actually have. I'm also glad when Mr. Kwabeze admitted that the National Assembly needs to pass the MTEF. No, even if it is by resolution. Even if it is by resolution. There was a time in this country when it was by resolution that we passed a doctrine of necessity, which permitted the then Vice President of the Federal Republic to become acting president.
But the MTEF is different. The
so,
passage,
the
mode of passage is different.
It actually means, yes, it actually means that the National Assembly must concur with what the federal executive.
That is easier to do than passing the budget, isn't it?
Oh, of course, yes. But of course, yes. But it also means that it must be passed first before the budget is laid, because the budget must agree with it. So if the foundation of the budget is MTEF and FSP, and that foundation is not yet ready, now by what authority are you now dragging the budget? So my position is very simple.
But you heard him say there was nowhere in that law where it said the budget had to go, the MTEF had to go forth before the budget.
To the extent it has to be passed, maybe phrasing that?
If the Fiscal Responsibility Act, I think the problem with our system is that we do not have respect for laws, really. If the Fiscal Responsibility Act says that the MTEF must be ready by June, at least by the second quarter of the year, and it is on the basis of that MTEF that you write the budget, then it's so clear that the budget takes its strength from the MTEF FSP. Now, that MTEF FSP is not ready, and you have the budget.
Now, the big question is this budget going to get Nigerians anywhere?
This budget is just a ritual. It's just the normal ritual. Of course, as you do know, the performance of this current year's budget now, especially capital budget, is less than 30%, just about 28%. So, you just heard very recently that the Federal Ministry of Finance is just releasing the capital. The capital releases for this year's budget is just being released as at now. So how do you calculate? There's going to be a disconnect as to when you begin to calculate which budget applies to which year. For example, you have a 2018 budget that National Assembly says should extend to next year, even at variance with an existing federal law, which is the Fiscal the Financial Year Act of 1980, which defines the Nigeria financial year clearly as a period starting in January 1 and ending December 31. All right. So you have a potpourri of contradictory laws upon the Nigerian fiscal system.
Okay, we'll get him to respond to this, Mr. Kabuzi, soon. But let me also take you up on this. When you say that some of the key assumptions are not realistic, Mr. Kabuzi has said that, look, in history, just a few years ago, we've been able to do 2.3, 2.5. So why is this not realistic? Talk about the benchmark for oil, for instance. I'm
surprised that we are not factoring in the fact that Nigeria is a member of the OPEC. And OPEC will determine at times our production ceilings. And those production ceilings, most of the time, when you now have oversupply. Saudi Arabia, for example, is not being restrained in supplying oil into the international market. Russia is also pumping hugely into the international market. Under that scenario, we are expecting Nigeria to produce at 2.3. At any rate, the history shows that there has never been a time that when in the last 3 years we consistently or reasonably produce or release into the market 2.3 billion. We have been oscillating between 1.8 and 2 billion. So that means 300,000 barrels will not be produced per day. That is about 180 million barrels per year.
But he says that a new platform is coming, a new oil field is coming up
to
cover that.
The essence of budgeting really is that it should be realistically predictable. You do not base a budget upon a company that has not yet come on stream.
Isn't that realistic enough for you? That
no, it's of course not realistic. This was the time, of course, 3 or 5 years ago, we also thought that some people will crash the cement price because they have just started producing some cement and they established some company. Some even predicted that the price of cement will crash to 500 naira per bag. Now, we now have all the cement companies as the price crashed below even 2,000 naira.
So even in this case where he's talking about oil prices being a global projection of about $60, $70 a barrel, you don't think this is realistic?
It's relying on IAE and others, and those ones have been proved. Even Fitch Fitch's report and Fitch's predictions have been proved to be, at variance at times, most of the time, not at times, most of the time, with the reality of the international market. Because the reality of the international market is not based upon sheer econometric calculations, but on the political economy of international world market. It can just be based upon discussions between the Saudi prince, the powerful, bin Salman, and you can just say, okay, well, we are releasing more into the market, and that political decision can crash the production or crash the price of oil. It is not only on the statistics that will come up with. No, it's more a political decision and speculation. That is the essence of capitalist development all over the world. Our history has proved that.
Okay. Dr. Kabeze, this matter of a realistic budget, let's look at a bit of what the projections are. In this 2019 budget, it's projected that Nigeria will be increasing its revenue from oil, but a decrease in revenue from the non-oil sector. Yet this budget has been considered a budget of consolidation. That's what it's been tagged. Do you really think it's worth standing on?
In 2019, the projection that oil revenue will constitute 53% of the revenues. If you look at the budget, that's what it is. 53%, is less than the contribution oil has made to the federal revenues historically, if you go back 10 years. And so it is not true that it's more of the same. The reality, however, is this, okay? In the medium term, we need the revenues from oil to be able to fund the diversification from oil. And therefore, and we all know that oil is a wasting asset, and the jury is out about how much longer fossil fuels are going to rule the day. And therefore, it is in the interest of Nigeria to optimize what it gets from the hydrocarbon resources while it still can, and to use those resources to develop the other sectors. All of this talk about sports, tourism, none of that can happen without infrastructure.